serious and a fatal wreck that was here on the major roads just the other day. And I passed a big accident this morning as well. Also, Americans, by and large, are not keen to continue doing this because in the last few years, it used to be 6 months, 6 months. Now it's 8 months, 4 months. So people in the percent of over 60%, almost 70%, feel that changing the clocks twice a year is not worth the hassle. Now, it was first adopted in the United States 1918 under the Standard Time Act and amended by the Uniform Time Act in 1966. And since that time, there have been a number of adjustments and enactments. And currently, Georgians spend 8 months in Daylight Savings Time and 4 months in Eastern Standard Time. You all are probably familiar with Greenwich Mean Time. It's now called the Universal Coordinated Time, UTC, which divides up the 24 time zones on the globe. And the status of Georgia is considered to be UTC -5 during Standard Time and UTC -4 during Daylight Savings Time. So if we study this, then we will determine if there's a benefit to remaining on Standard Time or changing to Daylight Savings Time in some fashion. Now, Florida, as you know, just recently enacted that in their legislature, and the way they had to do that was to make application to the Department of Transportation federally to do that. Now, I've been told that you have to, if you stay in permanent Daylight Savings Time, that requires more of an application and a hardship complaint because they expect you normally to follow the recommendations of the Daylight Savings Time federally. So the fact that Florida tried to do that or is in the process of doing that may be a model, or it may present some difficulties. But I think it's definitely worth the study and definitely worth looking at. I had absolutely no trouble getting signers onto this bill, and apparently there have been a number of email relays to various of our members also asking to support this and get on board and get something that, whichever direction we go, that at least makes it so we don't have to keep changing the clocks back and forth each year. And the language on page 2, 3, and 4 is sort of standard. I don't know that I necessarily need or want all that, but that's the standard for requesting a study committee. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Committee. Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, on line 17, it talks about changing the clocks twice a year is not beneficial to an individual's health and even maybe a health hazard. Are there statistics that show the health hazards that happen, excuse me, during this time when we change our clocks?
Yes, I can't cite them to you now, and that's really what I wanted the study committee to do, but it's been reported in a number of places that in the time right after the change that we have ischemic strokes and an increased number of heart attacks. And again, I don't have all that information in front of me today because this kind of came up as a sudden opportunity.
That's interesting because I'm out of whack, seems to be.
Yeah.
After I changed my clock during that time.
It's particularly hard in the spring because you do have we're all sleep deprived these days, and that extra hour taken away from us is very hard on body. I mean, we had a member of our legislative body down here, end up in hospital the other day. So it's not easy, and anybody who travels internationally also knows that, and they maybe get more used to it. But collectively, when you have the entire population in your area that's sleep deprived at the same time, it really is very bad. And industry also reports that people just aren't at their best, and accidents occur on the roads and in jobs. And there's really no benefit. Some people say, oh, we get an extra hour. Well, the days get longer anyway, and there's plenty of summer time, and people can adjust their businesses if they want to come and go at different times or have different hours or just whatever. Anybody can look in their clock, and if it says that business is closing in 15 minutes, and so you can find that out pretty readily. So I think that we could adapt to it, but the thing is that if we don't really need it, why do we have it?
Thank you for bringing this legislation because that Monday after we change our clocks, I have a 2-hour drive to come up here, and I so hate getting up that early.
And
to
you were
make that
a risk
drive.
on the road, right?
I'm a risk on the road. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Representative Caldwell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Representative Price, I want to say thank you for bringing it. I am not currently one of the others on here, but if I find time, I may run down there and go change that because this is a great resolution. I found myself driving in to the Capitol the day after daylight savings, laughing that there must be a reason that crossover day is prior to daylight savings. So, so thank you for finding a creative way around that. I'm really intrigued to see what you come back with. I know, in addition to the health concerns, there's been reported a spike in car accidents after
Yes,
daylight savings
I mentioned
as well,
that, but I
which
don't have the details today.
becomes a dramatically interesting
I just-
threat to health. So,
I just
thank
want to
you.
mention that Mr. Bentley has fallen asleep in the back of the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Burskin.
Beskin?
Sorry.
That's good. Thank you,
That's
Mr. Chairman.
close.
Close. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Price. Well, is this a matter of federal law? Who has the authority to make this decision? Is currently everywhere in the United States subject to daylight saving time?
No, individual legislatures can petition the Department of Transportation, and that's who determines it. It can go through Congress if there's like a major change that's not in sync, or it can be done administratively through the Department of Transportation.
So are there currently some states that
Oh,
don't
yes,
observe?
mhm.
How many states
Indiana,
is that? Okay.
Arizona, of course, Florida now, whatever process they're in of doing that.
Okay.
And I think there's some others, of course,
Mhm.
we already have 4 time zones, in the country. And
Right.
I'm not sure all the others at the moment.
Have you heard from educational concerns about this? The one thing I've heard forever is that schools are concerned that more children will be waiting for school buses in the dark in the winter, and this helps that problem.
Well, it did at one time, but now that we've gone to the 8 and 4, it actually counteracts the wisdom of having it the way it was.
Right.
So, like right now, this week, the kids are back in the dark again until the end of school.
Right.
Well, the days are getting longer, so there's a benefit there. But there's in the short days anyway, it doesn't benefit because we're on standard time. So it right now they've actually gone back to getting up in the dark again. So if you add up the months where they're in the dark,
Mhm.
it actually is worse now than it was the way it was like 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Price, why was it changed to 8 and 4?
I honestly don't know. My suspicion was that they were going to keep moving it closer and closer together. We wouldn't notice anymore, and then it would disappear. And I was kind of hoping that was the goal. And I'm just trying to maybe accelerate that process a little bit.
Another question is that you've mentioned several good reasons that we should look at standardizing it to one time, but is there any downside, or are you aware of downside?
Other than the
Or-
objection mentioned, the concern that Representative Beskin had, I really have not heard of another. And I know some people think or want to have extra daylight. There's in the summer, it's very pleasant to have. Again, the days are going to get longer anyway, and some people have even expressed concern that it's hard to go to bed at 9 o'clock when the sun's still shining. So that kind of cuts both ways. The disruption to people, elderly especially, is very disconcerting. I know where my mother is living with an elderly group, it just throws them for a loop. They all show up, late for breakfast, and they just can't adapt. It's just they don't have that adaptability. There's some people in the legislature I've noticed also having a little problem with adaptability, but I think it.
You're not calling any names, are you?
No, I wouldn't mention anybody,
No.
but it is very difficult. The elderly in nursing homes, et cetera, they have a hard enough time figuring out when to go to dinner anyway, and then you throw in this change in the clocks, and then they actually don't change the clocks on the wall, and they really get thrown for a loop. So it'd just be nice if everybody kind of didn't miss meetings. We had an important person didn't show up to a meeting the other morning. They overslept. They didn't change their clocks, what have you. And you don't know how many stories there are like that people miss their planes, miss their meetings, miss opportunities. And it's just a big inconvenience at the very least that almost everybody can have some story to support that.
Well, in the event that we approve this this going forward as a study committee, would you have people lined up to come and testify and talk about specifics when it comes to how many accidents have been had, and maybe doctors to talk about how it influences people's health?
Oh yes, we would do it properly if we were allowed to do so. And again, I have no preconceived notion of how it might go, but I think the most reasonable thing really is for us to revert to Eastern Standard Time. We're very close to the west end of the time zone anyway, and that would allow the sort of the proper adjustment to the sun, and hopefully it will be marching up the eastern seaboard if Florida and Georgia do that.
Well, you mentioned to me, if you don't mind sharing, maybe not, that you wasn't sure that what Florida had done may be totally kosher or may have run into some issues.
Well, it's that supposedly if your state legislature determines that you want to be part of the daylight saving program, then you have to go with the guidelines of the whatever that group is called, the Uniform Time something, National Institute of Standards and Technology, that they set the time frame, and you're obliged to follow those dates. So we don't have people changing dates, willy-nilly. And Florida, though, chose to adopt permanent daylight savings time, as I understand it, and that's just not part of that system. So their application may be a little more extensive in that they want to go to permanent daylight saving time. And we'll certainly explore that as well if they're granted that option, and that would be a third option on the table.
Okay. Representative Beskins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Price, if we did this, and most of the United States has not yet adopted this, does this say, what would we call this? We are adopting permanent daylight saving time, or we're not doing daylight saving time
Either
at all?
permanent daylight saving time or permanent Eastern Standard Time,
Okay,
which
so-
case we would be like Central Time.
That's my question.
Mhm.
So let's say they don't change, and so they alternate between Central Time and Daylight Saving Time. Sometimes we would be the same time as Central Time, and then sometimes we would be an hour ahead of them. Is that correct? We would never be 2 hours ahead of them. We would either be the same time as them or an hour different when they go on to Daylight Saving Time.
Correct.
Is that correct?
I
Okay.
believe that's correct, yes.
Okay.
Representative Silcock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern really is with interstate commerce. I really appreciate the health risk that this presents, but my concern would be there's so much business between D.C. and Atlanta and New York and Atlanta, and I know a lot of people base their schedules, on they count on the fact that we are on the same time as those other states up the eastern seaboard, and so my concern would be an interstate commerce issue.
Well, probably no more than between us and Chicago and Houston and San Francisco and Los Angeles.
I know a lot of folks that commute directly from Atlanta and rely on it being the same time.
Right. There are adjustments that would have to be made, but it probably doesn't exceed the health risks and the industrial risks and a lot of the other negative things that come from this. I think people can adapt. Our phones are very clever to tell us, when we're supposed to be somewhere and when we're not. So I think we could manage. I think on par, I think given the choice, it looks like it's about close to 70% of the people don't want to do it anymore.
Thank you. Representative Dukes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just speaking to what was spoken to earlier, primarily that is the reason that we are on this time, because if you look at the map, the world map, Georgia's not in the same time zone actually that New York is supposed to be in.
That's
It's
correct. We're on the far western end.
We are. We exceed being into that zone, but the reason that we have been in that zone is that New York and Washington pretty much kind of control the commercial and the political aspects of kind of the world, and we were tending to be more on that time zone. But you are absolutely correct. We are not in their zone, but for political and economic reasons, we decided to go there. So that's why we're there.
Well, committee,
Is that not true?
I'm sorry?
Is that not true?
Well, I fly back and forth too, but I would prefer just to make that adjustment. And I think people who travel a lot for a living can make that adjustment and adapt, you know, to the time that you have to do your business.
We have another committee coming in at 2 o'clock, so we have to get out of here. So we've got a choice here, committee, that we want to actually vote to pass or not pass the opportunity for Representative Price to have this study committee looked at, and of course has to be approved by the speaker anyway. But or if you want to have further discussions, we can do that. So what's the will of the committee? We do have a quorum, and so is that a motion to do pass? Yes, second. We have motion pass and second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Well, thank you. Looking
Thank you
forward
very
to
much.
actually being part of that study committee, not me personally, but if for some reason, Ms. Price, that, Representative Price, that doesn't get passed as a study committee, we actually, this committee right here could have some hearings on it this summer, if you'd like for us to.
Okay, I think we really need to, you know, look at how we can bring it to a House vote. Thank you.
Thank you.